carried. We'll come back to the draft submission on ECan's proposed plan change 7. Who's coming to the table for that? Hello.
Hello.
Right, would you like to just make a quick overview comment? Obviously we've read the draft, and I think a number of us are deeply concerned about how this is played out, and particularly concerned at the real absence of a desire from for public input into the proposed and I mean I don't know how many letters now I've written to government ministers telling them that this nitrate issue is the sleeper and the one that they should be taking a lot more seriously, and if they're going to apply a precautionary approach, get out of the chlorine and get into the nitrates. That's what I say. But there you go, that was a bit naughty of me. Carry on.
Thank you for that introduction. The key matter of concern to the council, as the Mayor has suggested, is the management of nitrates in groundwater and the potential impact of these on Christchurch's drinking water supply, but also on the environment as well. So the target levels, and I take the amended report as read, and I apologise for the changes which were put in front of you late yesterday. We got a bit confused with our versions of the submission. The target level of 5.65 milligrams per litre, and I refer you to the table on page 17 or page 943 of your published agenda, are considered by staff to just simply to be, or by council, simply to be too high, and particularly given that the first levels as low as 0.87 milligrams per litre have been found to pose a significant increased risk of colorectal cancer, as well as, secondly, the levels as low as 0.44 milligrams per litre can have significant impacts on the aquatic ecosystem. And thirdly, and it hasn't been missed by many, is that the cost to Christchurch of treating the water for nitrates, for the water supply for nitrates, would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So a significant impact there if that was to have to happen. The council is asking in its submission to ECan that a nitrate nitrogen level of less than 1 milligram per litre should be set. In addition to these nitrate levels, the council considers that the timeframes allocated to reducing the nitrogen levels are just simply too long. And again, I refer you to the figures on page 17 of the submission. Overall, council staff consider that Plan Change 7, whilst better than maintaining the status quo, still falls well short of what's required, and it simply won't achieve the objectives of the Land and Water Regional Plan, nor will it give effect to the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement and the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. Despite the complexity of ECan's proposed plan change and the very short time, the very short period available for us to prepare a submission, we are confident that the council's concerns are well articulated and that we have been specific enough on the issues to ensure that they are received seriously by ECan, but also broad enough to ensure that we're well positioned and have the opportunity to provide additional supporting information through the hearings process, which will be sometime early 2020. Just to finish up with, our next opportunity in this plan change process is what's called further submissions. That is where we receive the submissions, copies of the submissions from all the other submitters, and we have the opportunity at that stage to either oppose or support their submissions or parts of. So that's by way of introduction. I'd also just like to introduce to you Janice Carter, formerly of GHD, now with Barker and Associates.
That's right, yes.
I got that right. Janice has been providing the planning input to our submission. On my left here, I have it's been a long day for me too, I know. We have Jeff Butcher. Jeff was providing the economic assessment or input to our submission. Not here with us today, unfortunately, is Mike Thorley from Becker, who was providing who provided the groundwater science. And I'd also like to acknowledge Diane Shalander on the left here, who was the person involved initially with this plan change through the through the Schedule 1 submission process with ECan. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for staff? Pauline, Vicky, Yanni?
Are we absolutely positive that ECan can still use their transitional act post-October? Even though I know the process has started prior to that, can they continue to use that act?
That is correct, and we don't have Brent Pizzi in the room with us just at the moment, but we are confident that they can continue to use that process as part of the through to the hearings process. Yep.
Bang. Okay, thank you.
Vicky?
Mentioned there's no 0.7 for our deep aquifer bores. So in the WIMAC zipper, there's a pretendy limit of 3.8. Is that not in the actual ECan document? What have they put in the document as the limit that's allowed on the Christchurch aquifer?
No, I don't really know, it's outside my space really.
Yeah.
There is limits within the plan change, but what we're suggesting is that they be a lot lower than what...
Right. So in their document, they've left these numbers of 3.8 in the Christchurch one and 5.65 in the WIMAC area.
Are you looking at Schedule 8?
I'm looking at the original WIMAC zipper.
Oh, right, okay. The way that's been translated, as far as I'm aware, is a little bit outside my area of expertise. We really need Mike Thorley here to answer that, but my understanding is that 3.8 is the target that they've used and worked back from that in terms of the table that Peter referred you to in table 8.9 on the, I think it's page 95 of your report.
17,
is it 90?
yeah.
Or page 17 of your report, that what they've done is they've used those targets and worked back certain amounts of reductions to achieve that. What the submission is saying is that that's not enough and that we should be going down to less than 1.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
in the actual documentation that ECan's done, have they included an actual number as the target in the Christchurch aquifer?
No, they haven't. In the submission, we've asked for a target to be put in.
So they've left it blank?
Yeah.
So despite the fact it was in the original zipper?
That's right. I now understand what you're
right.
saying. So if you look at the table, we've added in a couple of extra targets, and they're for the Christchurch aquifers, and some time limits for them as well. So that's part of the submission.
So in terms of their documentation and what would actually become law, they haven't even set a target for the Christchurch aquifer?
No, they haven't in this plan change as yet, no.
So, okay, so I've been telling people it's 3.8 and that's way, way too high, but there's actually no limit.
Well,
No, there
is.
Just to clarify a
Yeah.
bit, as you're probably alluding to, although there was reference to the Christchurch West Melton Zone in the Waimakariri ZIPA,
Yeah.
the Plan Change 7 in the chapter having to do with the Waimakariri sub-regional zone is only for the Waimakariri. It does not have any limits explicit set. What ECan are telling us, at least my understanding, is that the Christchurch West Melton Zone will be dealt with when they deal with the Christchurch West Melton Zone in a future plan change. That's my understanding.
So in 3 years' time, they might look at limits on the Christchurch aquifer, But this actual plan change, which allows the nitrates to come in, doesn't impose any limit within the Christchurch aquifer?
Well, that's, I've just got a text from Mike because he's in Melbourne and he's listening to the streaming of this, and he's
Oh,
just
Mike.
he's just said that yes, there's no limit. It was, as I said, that's what we've done in the submission, is we've put some limits on.
Right, but you have in terms of
In
the
terms
submission.
of the submission, yeah.
But ECan, in terms of the plan change, has left the Christchurch aquifers, is this what you're telling me? Because this is even worse than I've been saying on Facebook. Has left the Christchurch aquifers with no actual limit on the nitrate contamination.
The intention is that they would do a plan change that would bring that in, as Diane was saying about the West Melton area, that the Christchurch aquifers are not within the area. So that's...
So the
plan change would
Waimak
come later.
dairy farming and other farming area is within the area.
Mm-hmm.
The impact of it is within the Christchurch area totally, because the nitrates are coming underneath the Waimakariri River, so it's polluting our aquifers, but no limit on the nitrates that may fall in, that may go in.
That's our understanding in terms of the way the plan change has been drafted. They've used limits to work out other things in terms of contributions, but my understanding is that there is no limit in the plan change as it stands at the moment.
So what was written in this thing, the original thing that they had a whole lot of Waimak people on and nobody from the City Council at all, was a limit target of 3.8. That's not mentioned anywhere.
No, again, so what ECan has been doing is taking, as they go through and do these plan changes, they take the ZIPAs that were done for the respective zones, and then will then use that to develop plan changes. So you're correct. Although the 3.8 is in the Waimakariri ZIPA, it is not in the sub-regional chapter for the Waimakariri zone.
So in the ZIPA, it also says that the current pathways towards concentration are 4.7, so we're being so good to limit it to 3.8, but actually they're not limiting it at all. So the effective limit on it would be the maximum allowable value of 11.3 milligrams per litre of nitrate. Is that right?
I
can't
don't know,
believe that's
I'm
right.
not sure I would go that far. All I can say is that what they've decided to do is only set explicit, specific targets for the Waimakariri zone,
Yeah.
and leaving the Christchurch West Melton zone, which is our side of the Waimakariri
Yeah.
River, to a future plan change.
So with this change, even though we know the nitrates are coming, no protection whatsoever for the Christchurch aquifer.
Well, there will be protection because the plan change seeks to limit land use activities within the Waimak sub-region, which will contribute towards...
Except
Yeah.
there is no limit placed on it, and there is no penalty placed on any farmer who goes above that limit.
Correct.
So effectively, there's no limit.
For
So
the
never
Christchurch
mind, just come put your nitrates into our drinking water aquifer.
Yep.
Is that, am I, like, I'm hoping I'm wrong.
I think that's...
Please make me wrong.
I think that technically you're right. Yes, there's no limit in the actual tables for this plan change that would guarantee a limit for Christchurch aquifers. That, as we've been saying, that work is still being done, and there'll be a further plan change that will put a limit in for Christchurch. But so having said that, one of the submissions that we've put in here is that they should put a limit in for the Christchurch aquifers. Yeah.
Wow, that's even worse. I thought they had. And could I just ask Jeff, sorry, in terms of the cost to Christchurch people, so since there's no limit now on the nitrates coming in terms of their plan change, the cost to Christchurch people, there's a footnote in here from, I think, somebody quoting Mike Burke, but I think it's a guesstimate only, of 550 million. Have you done any further work on the actual cost of just open slather on our aquifers?
I haven't done any further work. We've got that number, which is 500 odd million for a capital cost, ongoing operating costs, which probably add another couple of $100 million to that. And and a net present value of another $200 million. The thing is that is a cost which isn't likely to be incurred for a long time. So you won't, you've got three options. You can abstract water from the Waimakariri River, which has relatively low nitrates, might have other things, but you're going to have to chlorinate it anyway. You can have under-bench units to take the nitrate out of your water, and that's going to cost you, well, again, about, depending on some assumptions you want to make, around about $1 billion. 0.8 to 1.6 billion was what I wrote. You can put in a reverse osmosis plant, which they haven't tried to look at this in the analysis they've done under Section 32, but that also looks to be of the order of about $1 billion. Now, those costs won't be incurred for maybe 50 years in some parts of Christchurch, and maybe, is it 200 years before you get, the nitrate levels, or 800 years by the time you get to Eastern Christchurch. So there's a whole lot of uncertainty, but yeah, basically it's a really big number that won't be incurred for quite a long time, and it will be incurred by the residents of Christchurch as opposed to the benefits which will accrue to the landowners while they do that farming. Now,
All of the externalities, all of the costs accrue to Christchurch.
Yep.
The benefits, if there are any, accrue to the landowners in Waimak.
Yeah, and they're quite significant.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have a go, because I'm just gobsmacked.
Yep. So, sorry, who else had questions? Phil and Dion and Yanni.
Thank you very much for your report and all this work. Just to be clear, one of the changes that's been made then is that the nitrate threshold that we're now referring to, that we're asking for, would be less than 1 milligram per litre. Yep,
That's right.
That's correct.
that's right. Good.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing too, I guess, is we're not making any comment in relation to the consultation, and we're well aware that, in fact, ECan do consultation differently. But it's sort of like, are we not going to make any comment to the fact that Christchurch has been missed out or not taken into account by way of this plan change, and it's been, the actual effect is
Yeah.
to wait another 3 years?
We actually do have a comment on that.
Oh, do we?
In the second page, which is the preamble, before you get to the table, we basically talk about that and say that, I think it's, I'll just find a section. So it's actually the very last paragraph on page 3.
It's of the first 2 pages, the last paragraph of
Okay.
the text before you get to the table.
So we say the council further notes its disappointment. No changes to section 9, which
Yep.
is the West Melbourne
Thank you,
section.
I missed that.
Yeah.
There was one other part too in relation to the questions Vicky was asking. Are we then asking ECan to actually work through the potential costs, but particularly including the health costs? Yeah.
Yes, we've made it quite clear in the submission, and you'll see that that's one of the changes that we've made on page 15 there, where we did have some estimates of costs to treat and do associated things around those high levels, that further work needs to be done on the costs of an alternative supply of water. So we've made that quite clear. Yeah.
And then though costs, if this isn't done, future health costs in terms of people's health, that's something that we don't know about.
Yes, again, in that same paragraph on that page there, is, and the relief that we've sought there is that they undertake proper alternatives
Yep.
in their evaluation Section 32 report, given the wide-ranging impacts of this.
Yep. Thanks, Peter.
Dion?
Does the new national policy statement for water, does that have an impact on this,
The freshwater.
the freshwater one? It doesn't?
It may do. It kind of depends on what those changes actually look like. Right now, as you would be aware, the government has just released a discussion document, so.
Yes, I see the submissions helpfully close on the 17th
Yeah, no,
of
it's
October,
ridiculous.
which is 5 days after the election.
Yes.
It kind of feels like with the other one, the urban development one, and a couple of others that are all out in the same time frame, that there's one group that they're not actually that particularly interested in hearing from.
Which is
Never mind.
local government. But anyway, can I hear the... It does, well, I think it does.
Does it cover
No,
No.
Not really.
It's
fresh water,
Yeah,
surface water.
so it doesn't cover your aquifers.
Yeah,
No.
but some surface waters
But
recharge
the
with springs.
surface water is what would,
Your aquifers, your
So that you can't disconnect them completely.
So at this stage, we'd have to say, no, it doesn't
Right.
change the opportunities for this process.
I was just thinking of a way to railroad this before.
No,
Stall it, I should say.
I think that, yeah, I can understand the sentiment,
Good try.
but I think the question's been asked and answered, so, Yanni?
I'm just trying to understand the sequencing. If this goes through, does it become part of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy targets? Is that kind of how it works? Or?
No, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy is a non-statutory document. It does have a set of targets. There would be a relationship because all of the ZIPAs that are done, as in the case of the Waimakariri Zone Implementation Program Addendum, are done through the implementation of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. So there is that relationship, but what this is about, this plan change, doesn't directly affect the Canterbury Water Management
It's
Strategy.
the Land and
Right,
Water
so just-
Regional Plan and the
So,
Waimakariri
so
District.
a high level, we've got a
River.
Canterbury Water Management Strategy that basically sets up the ZIPs, who then work on the implementation plans, which inform these sorts of plan changes. Is that?
But all of
Basically,
those,
okay.
all of those things, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy and the
Non-statutory.
ZIPAs are non-statutory as opposed to the Land and Water Regional Plan and this plan change, which is statutory.
Yeah.
But so what's driving this? Is it some sort of strategy, or it's just a normal thing that ECan would just do in the course of their business?
That's a
Well,
good question.
but can I ask a kind of a side question which might focus the mind a little bit? Because, I mean, maybe we haven't called this out, but I had to assume, I have to admit that I assumed at the beginning of this process that there were appeal rights and that it would end up in front of the Environment Court. But of course, that is not the case. So perhaps, because I think the answer to Yanni's question, is there a strategy lying behind this? I think that there is a time-limited period at which these kind of changes can actually go through without the scrutiny that would be normal under a RMA process. Is that right?
Well, Brent Pizzy's just walked into the
Oh,
room.
excellent. Brent, I must have
And I'm
felt
always
your-
quite happy yes. Did you hear the question, the comment, Brent?
Oh, well, perhaps you could go to the end, because if you don't speak into a microphone, then the benefits of your wisdom will not be shared. And I may not have this strictly right, but when I started this particular process, or when we started this process, I had assumed that it was the beginning of a process that would end up in front of the Environment Court and we'd be part of an appeal and, you know, the whole 9 yards. But then I was actually told that that is not the case, that in fact this is part of the transitional process that is in place for a very short period of time, and I believe it's coming to an end on a particular date, like the, 12th of October, as something sort of plucked out of the air. But so I understand that this is not appealable, that this is, it could be subject to judicial review, but it is not a part of the normal RMA process, but it does affect a statutory change to the Land and Water Regional Plan, which, I mean, that obviously is of deep concern, because I thought we were on a bit of a journey here, but not. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. The change to the Land and Water Regional Plan is being made under the special ECan legislation. There's not a right of appeal on the merits to the Environment Court.
I haven't read this in the newspaper. Do you is this something that's kind of been well articulated before, or do you think that we should spell it out a little bit more carefully in our submission, the concern?
Well, I'll just comment firstly on the way that ECan's dealt with that. It's clear in the information that they've made available on their website and through other means that there is no right to appeals.
Is this the thing that I got at home in the letterbox that said it's really of an interest only if you live in Waimakariri or South Canterbury?
Points of law to the High Court.
Yeah. But there are still points of law to the High Court, and Brent may wish to elaborate on that.
Yeah, As I said, no appeals on the merits, no appeals
Right.
on the facts. You can appeal on point of law to the High Court.
Just trying to understand at a very high level, in terms of the Canterbury region, in terms of the strategy around what informs this attempt to change it. Like, why is this happening now? And how does it relate to all the other strategies that we have regionally?
It'll be the zipper, wouldn't it? I've been.
This is not the first plan change that is related to zone implementation programs, addendums, or ZIPAs. So there's been other plan changes that have happened, also following pretty much the same process, where there's a lot of public consultation within the zone for the zone committee to develop a ZIPA.
So it is driven by the zone committee.
Well, Stan.
I don't know if I'd use the word driven. It is
Part
done.
of, part of their
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
Right. So I mean, I think at some stage we need to kind of question the validity of that whole structure. Maybe now's not the time, but
No.
you know, it does concern me that we're doing our integrated water strategy, which agrees to kind of the Canterbury water management strategy, and I get that it's not specific around targets, but it does seem like we've created this kind of six-headed monster that's going off in all
Except
sorts
the
of
zone
directions.
implementation committees are all, the zone committees are all subsets of Christchurch Council and, or the local council and ECan.
Strategy.
Yes, which is a non-statutory document.
I just wonder if I mean, obviously we'll comment on the specifics of this plan change, but at what point do we start to address the governance structure around water in our region? And these sort of perverse outcomes.
Well, the government could have
that's been
sorted
raised.
that with a proper decision on ECan, but never mind. Yeah, Vicky.
It's probably to Jeff. So our subsidy, to our cost for continuing the type of farming that currently exists in the Waimakariri is somewhere between 800 million and 1.6 billion over the long term, and then some operational costs on top of that as well.
Those are our best guesses, yes.
Right, so on a guesstimate basis. And then can I just follow up? And so that continues the farming and the farmers are happy. Bad luck for the people of Christchurch. But just in terms of what's actually written in the plan, which is almost unreadable for any normal person, and thank you for doing it because it's really hard to get your head around, there is actually no figure limit on the nitrates that can come into the Christchurch aquifer. So at what point do we say you're not living up to this plan change and we want action? Like, what's the trigger point? How much nitrates do there have to be?
I can't speak as an economist about that.
No,
and you might
that
not
was
have been
more
asking
for-
me, but it
that
does
was more
seem to
for
me
Janice.
that having read all those bits, and like you, I thought there's a lot of information here, reading through 480 pages or whatever it was, that it's as though they had said, yes, there's a limit in Christchurch of 3.8. We're not going to put it in the plan, but we're going to insist on all these land use changes, which will cost farmers a lot, and we will restrict their behaviour because our modelling suggests that that will keep the nitrate levels in Christchurch aquifers below 3.8.
When they're currently
So it
0.44.
just seems to me that even if they'd put 3.8 in the plan, and you know there's all these reasons why they didn't, but even if they'd put it there, they probably would have put in place the same rules as they've put in place now, because those rules are aimed at keeping it below 3.8. Of course, there is all the uncertainty with the modelling and everything else, but
right, and some of the uncertainty with the modelling relates to the fact that they've only gone to the 50th percentile when you would normally go to the 95th.
Correct, and we've made that point
Yeah.
as clearly as we can in our submission, that it could be more conservative to ensure that that's
So the 3.8
recognised, yep.
modelling may be nonsense, may be wrong, I mean, yeah.
we'll bring evidence on that, I think. It's something that, it's quite complicated what they have done, and Mike Thorley, our groundwater scientist, has looked at it to date. So it's, because it's detail, we've written the submission in a way that would enable us to look more closely at the modelling and whether it's appropriate or not, and then basically bring evidence when it comes to a hearing on that. It's just the time frame that we've had so far to actually put the submission together, and there's so many technical documents that it hasn't enabled us to have a really firm grasp of what's been done in the modelling, and I think that that's something that we're going to have to work on.
So how, like, given your degree of expertise and the group of you, how aware of this do you think that the Christchurch people are when they got this, which makes no mention of nitrates? And the cost of, what, 800 million to 1.6, which is certainly not mentioned in
Well,
here.
if it's not in there, they won't be aware of it. I mean, to be fair to the economist who did the Section 32 analysis, he does talk about what it would cost to take water out of the Waimakariri. That's where those numbers came from. So they've thought about what that cost might be, but then they, even if you had, as an economist, put it into your calculations, you would say, well, it's not going to occur for 100 or 500 years, and you will all know the effects of discounting things, and even at 3 or 5%, you know, stuff 100 years out, this is not very important in purely numerical terms compared to the benefits that you'll get from farming over the intervening period, as they slowly have, and that, you know, they face significant drops in profits.
But I guess it depends which side of the Waimak you're on, doesn't it? Potentially.
As to who gets the benefits and who gets the costs.
Given that nobody in Christchurch gets any of those benefits, and actually the people of Waimak have a higher nitrate level that's allowed for than the Christchurch one. So theirs goes up dramatically. And those levels are only the average, aren't they? So potentially the nitrate level in Christchurch could go to 10 or whatever in some areas. That's probably more for Janice or Peter.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, I do think that Environment Canterbury are trying to do something. So in terms of the status quo, obviously, yeah, I think the plan change does do something. It does start to get more management of those farming practices. It is starting to pull in the nitrate leaching that's occurring. It just doesn't. The way the submission is set at the moment is it doesn't do it quick enough, and it doesn't set targets that we think are low enough that will achieve what will really protect the Christchurch water.
And how are those targets actually, the 3.8 or whatever it is, even though it's not mentioned, how are they policed?
The way they're policed, they're not actually policed. So what it is it's targets that are set so that when it comes to farmers going for consent to do certain land activities, then they have to do their farm environment plans and show how they're going to reduce the losses of nitrates from their properties. So it's about resource consenting, changes to farming practices, and then bringing in changes to what you do over time to meet the targets.
But if they've already got the consent, and Waimak Irrigation Limited has the consent, then if they go beyond, so they don't meet the 20% reduction in the first 20 years or whatever, what's the penalty?
Well, I think that ECan would be monitoring and trying to enforce this. I actually haven't seen anything indicating how that's going to be done, and that's another area that we need to look into a bit more.
It's not mentioned at all in the scheme.
Yeah, the normal process for a resource consent, if someone's not complying with their conditions of consent, is that ECan can go back and say, you're not complying with your conditions of consent, and would serve either abatement notices or enforcement action. I'm not sure what their strategy is for dealing with that, because it's not something that I have looked at this stage, but it is something that we do need to find out how they intend to implement it.
Jeff, can I just ask you, was there anything else when you looked at the economics that you noticed?
No, I mean, they didn't look at the health costs because they assumed that there wouldn't be any.
There's no health costs.
No, and even had the economist sort of written something, he would have said, we don't know the answer. So I will look at the other way of dealing with the health problem, and that's through treatment of water. So in a sense, they're saying, we don't know what the health costs are, but we do know what it would cost to treat the water. So, I mean, if you've treated the water, presumably you won't have the health costs. If you decided the health costs were quite low, you probably just wouldn't bother treating the water, I suppose. They didn't try and look at some of the environmental effects, and there's been a big debate in the economics community over how useful it is to try and do some of that work, and I think economists 30 years ago said, we'll be able to tell you the answer, and it's 497 million, give or take a wee bit. And now we've said, actually, really hard to measure those. We'll tell you about the bits we can measure, and all those other environmental bits and pieces will be described and quantified, but not measured in financial. So somebody's going to have to do that weighing up, which is where the commissioners come into it. Probably the thing that surprised me most in terms of the report was the costs that they're looking at for fencing out some of the, some of the waterways was $600 million. And when that seemed like a really big number compared to, and I'm not sure how much of that took place in the area which is called the nitrate protection area. But if you were to retire all that land in the nitrate protection area, which is something else that they might have looked at had they really been concerned about that, I mean, I've suggested that it could be of the order of $600 or $700 million, but that's got a huge margin of error because I detail how I came to that number, but that's something else that they would have looked at had they been trying perhaps to get a much lower nitrate number. So if you wanted one, you'd probably have to put all that land into dry land uses within that nitrate protection area. And that's what could have a cost of $600 or $700 million, and it would have that cost now, as opposed to being able to wait for 50 or 100 or 200 years and spending the same kind of money by putting a big pipe into the Waimakariri.
Right, so we've had all of the questions, so does somebody want to move the approval of the council's draft submission? You want to do that, Vicky?
I'm happy to, yeah.
Vicky, seconded by Phil Clearwater. Is there any debate? Yanni?
We don't often stand up in here anymore, which I think on matters that are really important, we should actually make a stand on this. It is so significant. You know, the pressure that we've been put under around chlorinating our water supply, when we've got this massive threat of nitrates and just so little action being done, is really, really alarming and concerning. I just find the consequence of what could be allowed implausible, and taking a long-term view is really important. But as we've discussed with climate change, we need to act now. And I think I commend the staff and the councillors who've worked on this submission. We should be really, really clear in our stance against what's being proposed. It goes against the removal of an elected ECan almost a decade ago, that we've now seen a huge gold rush for water rights in our region at the detrimental cost to our environment. And we need to make a stand as a council, and I welcome that in this submission today.
Thank you. Pauline?
Yeah, look, it's late in the day, I'm not going to talk for long, but I do just want to say, mō tātou, mō ka uri, muri ake nei, for us and our children after us, and that is taken out of the ZIP addendum. Whether they meant nitrates or not, I'm not sure. But, you know, and also in the zipper is that economic impact on farming must be balanced against the likelihood of excessive environmental impacts. And I think we need to swap that word balanced, it's versus now. And what I see here is the economy is winning. The economy is winning for farmers, but the economy is not winning for us. We're losing in that department, and that's quite clear. And I really want to thank the staff for all the work on this. It's been a huge effort in a short time frame, and thank you for your patience with us and talking us through it and all the workshops that we've had on this. It's been quite a learning curve, quite a lot of science involved. But you're quite right, the limits are coming down not low enough, and the pace is far too slow. This is another crisis that we're in. I really agree with Yanni, it's just not on. And it's not all doom and gloom for farmers. Farmers need to really actually look at the writing on the wall. They need to diversify. They've got opportunities. Find the opportunities in this challenge, and we can all win out of this. So, yeah, that's all I'll say today, but thank you again for all the work.
Thank you. Phil?
I also thank you. This has been huge work, and thank you very much for excellent helping us with an excellent submission. There's serious concerns, obviously, and to the point that at one stage one could think, well, why don't we oppose this altogether as a council and ask them to stop it? But unfortunately, that then would lead to the risk of further delay with a plan change. So at least there are some reductions proposed in their proposal. And I guess there's some things that are being done, or they're asking to be done, in terms of somewhat lower levels of nitrate, and we're saying, look, it's not enough, and it's certainly not going to happen fast enough. And also, though, that some farms are going to be required to reduce their nitrogen losses, and there's reference to increased minimum flows in our rivers, which we have asked for, and some requirements to exclude stock by way of fencing too. But clearly, the plan change does not go far enough, and I'm very pleased that we've got a strong submission making that loud and clear. And like, for example, I'm glad the submission does refer very clearly to the fact that the whole deal of climate change is entirely left out, which is kind of like telling, especially given the debate we had earlier. So I find it quite sad, really, that this is the state that plan change is in, but I think that's what we as a city and as a region are faced with, and I'm very pleased that, in fact, there is a process where hopefully some of this can be sorted.
Vicky?
It's been an interesting journey to try to find out what this plan change actually means. And I have to say, I've read the zipper, as it's called, and I've read a lot of the documents. I even listened to 26 minutes of Peter Skelton introducing the plan change on the ECan website, which was, I was going to say interesting, but it actually wasn't. But it just, he actually made no mention whatsoever of the nitrates in the Christchurch drinking water. And that's been what's missing. The people who are on this have been challenged by Forest and Bird because some of them are farmers in the area. There is no representation from Christchurch City whatsoever, and yet the financial impact on us may be between 800 million and 1.6 billion, and the health impacts are phenomenal. And the fact that we actually lose a very rare feature of pure source aquifers, long-lived water, very aged water, is just incredible. These aquifers, you have a report coming to you in November about a water conservation order for these very aquifers, which ECan, which is the organisation which on its own website says its job is to protect water at its source, is currently seeking to completely contaminate. And I can't put it any other way. I can totally understand that there are issues with farming, but that does not give anybody the right to contaminate a pure water source for an entire city, a very rare feature in a time when the whole world is suffering water poverty and the consequences of that. At the moment, the nitrate incursion in here, and some of it's naturally occurring, but the total nitrate concentration is less than 0.5 of a metre in the deep wells from which we take our water. It's 0.6 if you go to the shallow ones. I can't see in here any penalty whatsoever for the farmers who exceed that. It just makes no sense. The only possible consolation you get as Christchurch people is that your water is not going to be as damaged as the water for the people of the Waimakariri district, because their limit is 5.65, and that's an average, which means that it can go way, way higher. And they've modelled it very conservatively, only using the 50th percentile. The notification that they put out was laughable. This is pathetic. Like, by the time you've got inside, you've realised it says, particularly if you live in South Canterbury or Waimak, and probably discarded it. Even if you read it, and I was silly enough to do so, then you've got nothing that tells you actually the key risk to you is that we're going to contaminate your full drinking water with nitrates. It doesn't say that anywhere. So in terms of telling people, as they are required to do, even under the shoddy legislation which they're using, they haven't done it. And the fact that they're using that emergency legislation to stop appeals to the Environment Court just riles me like you would not believe. So I'm very pleased that we're making a submission. Let me encourage every person in Christchurch, and you've only got till tomorrow, to make it. because you don't get a right of appeal on this, I'm sorry, and you're working under legislation which is just horrific, from unelected people who've been allowed to do all sorts of things for a long time. So I just want to say to the people who've done the submission, thank you. I think you've been amazingly tolerant for all the questions that you've had over a very long period of time. But this is really, really important for all people in Christchurch. I've made a personal submission. I have to say I got carried away slightly, and it does include ECan of environmental vandalism and a few other things, which is absolutely true. But you're also allowed to make personal submissions, and I would encourage any one of you who values their water to do so, because this wrecks it.
Thank you.
Feel free.
So that shuts off the debate, doesn't it? Yeah, sorry. I was going to say something about
Oh,
the
no, feel free.
Minister not responding.
No, feel free, go for it.
No, it's all right. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the staff and the team for the amount of work and effort that you've put into this. It is a complex issue. It's really hard for the public to have a real sense of agency when submission processes are made so complex and difficult. You've helped it unravel it even further today, so thank you very much for your assistance and support.